This video is going to introduce you to the series and show you how to create the framework that we'll be using each week for our 6-inch block. The name of the series is Patching the Hole in the Barn Door. So have no fear, your quilt blocks will not have a hole in them. We're going to be creating blocks to go into the center. That's the whole idea of the patching. This is the traditional block called Hole in the Barn Door, but of course it usually has a solid center. Oftentimes it's the same as the background, but sometimes it is a third fabric. However, we're going to be creating 6-inch blocks that will go in to the center. Hi, I'm Stacy from Stacy Creates Stuff, and I am so excited to bring you my revised program that I designed about 22 years ago, almost 23, as a block of the month when I owned a quilt shop. I am revamping this series and doing it as one block a week. Because who has time to take a whole year to make a quilt? I've got a lot of fabric I need to get through. The fabrics that I picked out for this current series, I'm going to be using black and whites for the background. And then I have chosen 12 rainbow colors in nice bright prints to serve as the colors in the quilt, from the framework to also the inside of the block. Now I've chosen 12 because there are 12 blocks, and so therefore I can use each one as a framework for the blocks. This quilt is perfect for using up your stash and your scraps. When I originally did this program, we handed out fat eighths each month, starting our patrons off with 2 fat eighths plus their background fabric. One of the things that I dislike about many Block of the Month programs is that everyone's quilt turns out the same. And I really didn't want that to happen. So I gave my patrons the choice to use the fabrics in however they wanted. And of course, from each month, they had scraps left over that then they could use in future blocks. As a matter of fact, they would need to use some of those scraps in future blocks. I have raided my stash bin and found pieces of fabric that are all either half a yard or less, which I know should be plenty for doing the blocks. I will put the fabric requirements in the description. If you would like to receive via email the complete pattern for each week right to your inbox, then see the description below so that you can join the mailing list to receive those instructions. You won't be bombarded with additional emails unless you choose to add yourself to some of my additional lists. So have no fear. Each week you will receive the instructions for that week's block. Plus, you'll be starting out with the starter instructions, which I'm about to demonstrate. And in the end, you will receive an email for 3 different ways that you can set this block, from a lap size quilt up to a queen. When I first presented this block of the month back in 2001, I gave my patrons 3 different colorway choices. We had Aunt Grace, which were the 1930s and 40s prints, Debbie Mum, and then a bright colorway. Unfortunately, I no longer have my original samples of this quilt, but that's okay. I'm going to be making a new one. In this series, we'll cover a variety of techniques, from traditional piecing to English paper piecing, foundation piecing, and we'll even tackle some of those blocks that involve curves. I know that you can do it, and we're going to have fun along the way. So I hope you'll join me on this quest. The videos will be premiering each week on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's get started learning how to construct the outer part of the block. Just know that you won't be putting the whole block together until you have that center part. This was just for show. I'm going to begin with some of the background fabric. Now I have half a yard here, but I'm going to be using this piece multiple times. And this is probably more than enough combined with the other 3 background fabrics that I have chosen. I'm going to start by straightening one edge and then cut a 4-inch wide strip. I'll set the remaining fabric aside for now. Now my strip is currently doubled over, so I'm going to go ahead and trim off the ends and then start cutting the pieces. This particular fabric is somewhat directional. It does have a stripe, although it's not super directional. I think no matter how you cut it, it's interesting. If you are going to use a directional fabric, you cannot be concerned that it always has to be facing the right direction. So just bear that in mind as you choose your fabrics. All right, now that I have trimmed off the end there, I am going to cut 2 4-inch squares. Remember, my fabric was doubled over. And then I am going to cut a 6.5-inch strip, and there'll be 2 of those as well, because again, the fabric is doubled over. I'm not using the marks on the mat. I am strictly using the markings on the ruler. And always double check, 6.5. From this strip, I am going to cut it in half, which is 2 inches. So I will end up with a total of 4 2-inch strips. 4 2-inch strips by 6.5 inches and 2 4-inch squares. I'm going to set those aside, and I'm going to cut the exact same thing from one of my main fabrics. I think that one needs a press first. So I'm going to go ahead and square up one edge of this. For this piece, I'm also going to start with cutting a 4-inch strip, and I'm going to go ahead and cut one more because I know that one is not enough. I'll save my leftover piece for some future quilt centers. From one of these strips, I'm going to cut 2 4-inch squares. I will save the remaining part of that strip for future blocks. And from this second strip, I'm going to cut 2 6.5-inch pieces. I need to square up this end just a bit. I know it's small, but I might save that piece too. All right, taking these 2 rectangles, going to stack them directly on top of each other and divide them into 2-inch widths. Now we have 4 rectangles of our color, 4 rectangles of our background, 2 4-inch squares of our frame color, and 2 of the background. I'm going to go ahead and pair one of my pink squares with one of my background squares, right sides together. Do that for both of them. I'm going to bring in my little ruler. It's a little easier to handle. Draw a diagonal from corner to corner, and then mark again on a 1/4 inch on each side of that line. The line that's a 1/4 inch away will be my sewing line. And I'll do the same for the other square. I'm going to take these to my sewing machine, sew along those outer 2 lines on both squares, and I'm also going to sew these pairs together. So I'll end up with 4 pairs of background and pink rectangles. Now that I have sewn those 2 outer lines, I'm going to go ahead and cut down the center. You don't have to worry about a super precise cut. You just don't want to cut your stitched lines. And ideally, you're somewhere right down the center. I'm going to take all these and press them towards the pink. All right, I'm all pressed. And now I need to trim my squares. I want them to finish as a 3.5-inch square. Now, this is where that 45-degree angle line comes in really handy. I'm going to place the 45-degree angle mark right along the diagonal, and I want the point of it to be where the point is of the pink and background fabric. And then I'm just doing a quick check to make sure that my block is indeed 3.5 inches, and whew, just made it. So now I can trim off this piece, flip it around, slide up here to where the 45-degree angle is coming up this way. And this time I am making sure that the intersection of the 3.5 inch line, which is this one down here, and this is also happens to be 3.5 inch, but you'd want it to be, this is the edge I just cut, so you want this to be along an edge. And that little point should match the point on my block. So sometimes it's a lot to trim, and sometimes not so much. Now that I've trimmed the two pink sides, the edge of my block should fall right at the 3.5 inch mark, and the bottom edge here should align perfectly there along the bottom. And one last edge. And sometimes you don't even need to trim an edge. It just happens to work out just perfectly. This one's pretty darn close, but I'll give it a little shave. And I'm just going to repeat that with the other 3 squares. All of my squares are done and all of my rectangles. It just so happened that when I drew the diagonal of my background and pink squares, that 2 of them were going in one direction and 2 of them were going in the opposite direction. Sheer luck, did not plan it that way. But it does work out, because that way I can have all of my corners going in the same direction. So just remember, if you use a directional fabric, this might not happen. You might have some that went the other way. And you could play around with somehow getting them to be how you want them to be. But I am going to probably keep them like this. Then these pieces will go in between. So this will become the top. A similar piece down here will become the bottom. And of course, these side pieces will go in here, but we want to construct each week the block that goes in the center. So you have 2 choices at this point. You can go ahead and sew this row and this row, that'd be the top and the bottom of the block, and just hang on to these until you've constructed the block for that particular week. Or you can just hold on to all the pieces until you have that block center done. And you could just wait until the end and construct all of these in the end. It is totally up to you. So I think I am going to not put this all together quite yet, and we'll show you how to put a block together on week 1 after we have done the first block. That will be premiering next week on Wednesday, February 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss that video.